This is Brad Rankin. I'm one of the education technologists. I think we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Today's webinar is about getting started with the Blackboard Grade Center. And I'm an education technologist with KUIT. This is being recorded. Don't worry too much about it. You guys are already at this point. Should have the feedback icons you can see already. So we'll just do a few introductory things regarding Blackboard and the Grade Center. We'll talk about creating columns, entering scores, and then we'll get into more of the calculation of grades, so configuring the total and weighted columns, and a few things about managing the Grade Center, and then if we have time, a few tips and tricks. I'm going to get into Blackboard here. And if you want to follow along with the course, I guess you could. It depends how much you can split your screen if you want to watch the screen and try something yourself as well. But this is just a course I've set up to demonstrate the Grade Center. So, but I'm not sharing that yet, am I? Wonder, let's see here. Let me just stop share and start again. Okay. That's better. That looks better. Now you can actually see Grade Center in Blackboard. So I've got a demo course. I do have a banner at the top. We don't spend much time talking today about banners, but if you ever did want to make a banner, you can go to Google and actually just put in Blackboard banner using PowerPoint. There's a pretty easy way to make one using PowerPoint. But anyway, to get to the Grade Center, it's in the course management area. We tend to call it the control panel. So you've got a Grade Center area. If you click on it, it expands out. There's several links within the Grade Center area. Today, we'll primarily look at the full Grade Center. The needs grading area is helpful if you do have any online activities. For instance, if you're using a test or a Blackboard assignment, as students submit those, you'll click on needs grading and you'll see what needs to be graded. Also, below full Grade Center, we see assignments and tests. A little bit later, we may take the time and look at smart views. There are 2 smart views that are already created in every course, one for assignments, one for tests. So if you clicked on assignments, it would just filter your Grade Center to where you can just see the tests or the assignments that students have, submitted or that are available in your course. We'll go ahead and click on full Grade Center. We'll take a look across the top with the buttons that we have to work with. Create column and create calculated column. These 2 buttons are apparently easily confused because they both say create column. Most of the time, you'll just be using the button on the left for creating a column. And this is just a manual column that you create, one where you'll be recording scores for an activity that's offline. If you're using a Blackboard assignment, a Blackboard test, if you created a Blackboard wiki or journal or a blog and you asked, or you told Blackboard you want it to be graded, it's going to create a column for you. So this column, again, is only used for things you're going to enter yourself with things that really aren't connected within Blackboard. The create calculated column, in a lot of cases, isn't even needed because when we create courses automatically now with our system, every Blackboard course has 2 calculated columns. I would have preferred they called these calculating columns because they're columns used to calculate grades. But when you first see that, a lot of people think, well, I want this grade to be calculated somehow. Well, the calculated column only calculates grades for you. It isn't a place you can enter anything. So it's going to be a place that summarizes scores from somewhere else. The Manage button gives you a few options. So it's really just a button to show you a menu. And we'll come back here a little bit later as we think about managing the Grade Center after we've entered some scores and done a few other things. Most of the time, you probably won't have a lot of need for the Reports button. If you create a report, it's going to make pretty much a progress report like a student might need in middle school or high school. Then Most instructors at the university don't use that, but there may be a few instances where that might be helpful for you, but it's going to create a separate report for each student. View grade history, we really won't worry too much about that today, but as a place you can come in and look at the overall history of the grades within your course, within this grade center. And submission receipts, you can also tell if, if a student submitted a paper into an assignment. With one of the upgrades recently, students now receive email messages to know that they've submitted something, and you could also check here to make sure they did submit something. Over on the right side, we have a filter. I've never had a time where I wanted to use that filter. When I've seen people use it, it usually caused them problems. So I think for the most part, you might just ignore it. And then work offline allows you to upload something to the Grade Center and download. Some people have large classes, they have a lot of students, they may have a test that they use at the testing center, where the testing center gives them, a worksheet, an Excel spreadsheet that contains scores from maybe 500 students in their class, and they want to upload that into the Grade Center. Well, using upload and download, you can do that. We won't spend much time with that today. The download we used to use quite a bit because we used to remove students about 2 weeks after classes were over. This is before we had automated course creation. So instructors had to download their grades somewhere. Well, you can download the grades, you can download the entire grade book, you can download a particular column, but I guess one thing you'd have to think about, the security officer wants you to know you better be careful with that data because it is FERPA and it is, somewhat restricted data. So you gotta be careful where you might place that. But anyway, let's go back over here to the Create Column button. So first thing we're thinking about is just creating a column where you can enter some kind of information. If you click Create Column, we get the Create Grade Column screen. It looks a lot like most of the screens in Blackboard when you're creating something. So the first thing we do is be able to give it a name. So maybe I'll call this Project 1. The Grade Center name isn't very useful most of the time. A lot of the column names come over from, like if you create an assignment, whatever the assignment name would be, would come over as column name. If it's a fairly long assignment name, Blackboard tends to kind of truncate it where it's kind of maybe confusing. And that's about the only time you'd care to put a Grade Center name. I've seen instances where people had like Quiz 3 and they copied their course from some other time and they decided to call it Quiz 5. Well, it ended up being a little bit confusing because in the Grade Center, it looks like Quiz 5 when actually it's Quiz 3. And oddly enough, the students see the column name. Students don't see in the Grade Center itself. So moral of the story would be ignore the Grade Center name for the most part. You can put a description in. Most of the time, there isn't much need for description. If your column name isn't specific enough, you might want to change your column name. But like every other screen in Blackboard, you've got a description. Below the description, we have two display options. Right now, it's defaulted to score. So if I want to enter these grades as a score, so for instance, this is worth 25 points, I'll leave it at score. I can enter 20, 22, 23, 25. The secondary display would let you also show it as a percentage. Right below the drop-down, it tells you that this display only shows in the Grade Center. And it might have been helpful if they actually said this only shows to anyone who has access to the Grade Center. Students do not see the secondary display. So the secondary display doesn't show up in the My Grades tool that the students use. As far as a category is only going to be useful if you're weighting grades, at least for the most part. That's when you'd care about a category. We'll get to that a little bit later, but there are some default categories already here because of different activities within Blackboard. So we have assignment, survey, test, discussion, blog, journal, self and peer, and wiki. Points possible is necessary. It's one of the required fields. It doesn't show up as much as it used to, but there is supposed to be a little asterisk out in front of points possible. There's also an asterisk out in front of column name. Those are the only two required fields on the column information screen. Moving down, we could discuss rubrics at another time, but there is a possibility of using rubrics. You can select a rubric you've already created within Blackboard. You could create a new one. Also, you've got the date availability. This due date will appear on the course calendar. If you go into the control panel, there is a calendar link, and students also have access to that. So even though this isn't connected to a Blackboard activity, you can still put a due date in here and students would still have access to it. So they can keep track of the work they have coming up. And the due date's not too surprising. It's pretty much like the same options you have when you're creating an assignment or a test. You can come in here and pick your dates, pick your time. It always defaults to the last minute of the day you selected, so it's 1 minute before midnight. At the bottom of the screen, we have these options that appear with most columns in the Grade Center. Do you want to include this in Grade Center calculations? Well, more than likely, yes, because we probably wouldn't have created it if we didn't want to. There could be instances where you didn't want to include it. You may have decided to make this some kind of a text column, and it's just a place you're going to be entering in some kind of a value. Like, for instance, maybe you have a art class and you have the students use some kind of a locker system or something. You could put a column here for locker, and you could have a place and put their numbers in. And so you wouldn't have to worry about, of course, entering it or having included in calculations. You can show it to students, which more than likely you do. Sometimes instructors wait until after something's been graded and then they allow students to see that. The last choice, I don't think I've ever seen anybody select, because it will show to the students the average and median grade for the columns here. Yeah, if you do use the due date, it will show both to the instructor and the student if something was submitted late. There's always a notification in the cell, but yeah, a good point. At this one, I can click submit, and when I go to the full grade center, then my new column is going to be over here on the right, on the far right. So there's my project one. Now again, so far all we've looked at was just creating the column, and we use the create column button. We might take a look at, just for a moment, at the create calculated column button. It does expand out to a menu, and the two options that are used most often are total column or weighted column. And in that case, most people, well, it depends on your syllabus, it seems like the majority of people use total column because they've just set their course up to be a certain number of points. As you would know, if you're using weighted column, total is easier to explain to students. Weighted is a little more complicated, and also if students try to calculate their own grades, sometimes it gets a little bit of a challenge. But with weighted, you have the option of being able to put in percentages for various categories. We'll look at that a little bit later. But in the beginning, a lot of people get confused by these two buttons. Most of the time, you'll be using the create column button. If you do want Blackboard somehow to maybe summarize grades for you, to calculate something for you, then of course you're going to use the create calculated column. I'm going to go over here to my column for project one, and if I click in here, I'll get my cursor, and of course I can just start entering values. I think I said the project one was worth 25 points. I'm going to put 26 in. If I hit enter, it moves my cursor down to the next cell, and so I can just keep entering grades here. And I do notice then that I have, the percentages showing because I selected the secondary display to be percentage. And it's only going to be displayed to me. Students don't see that secondary display. But it could be kind of helpful as you're moving along to maybe see that percentage. Let's say there's something about that I don't like. Maybe already I've noticed that I didn't really want to put 25 points in. It should have been 20 points. Something else you might notice is that when I'm sitting in this column, across the top here, it'll show me that this is a column worth 25 points. It's displayed as a score. It's visible to users. So that information is kind of handy from out on this screen. Well, let's say I want to change the grade from being 25 points to being 20 points. Well, if you come over here to the column heading and click on the options button, a menu shows up, and you want to click on edit column information. And when that comes back up, you're back to the original screen we had before. I can come back down here, and I can change this back to 20. Maybe I've decided I didn't like my percentage for that secondary display, so I might take that back off. And I'll click submit. Now when I come back, it may take a minute to refresh. I'm also on the wireless, so it may be a little bit slower. Yeah, everything looks all right. Possible now, you can see over here, if I stay in that column, up at the very top, as if you could read any of those numbers, the possible points is 20, and 2 out of 6 students have submitted, and 0 attempts need grading for that. So this button is going to be pretty helpful quite a bit of the time. And of all those options, it's edit column information where you'd be going most of the time. There is a delete column option that you may want to use at various times. You also may want to delete some other columns at various times. So I have an assignment column here for assignment 1. I have a wiki column called wiki 1. These are both connected to Blackboard activities. If I go to that button, I'll notice there's not a delete option. That's because this column is connected to an assignment I created in the course. I can't delete this column unless I delete the assignment within the content areas. So in this case, I don't have the delete option right now. And that may occur at various times. This happens for a lot of instructors if they've copied their course. Sometimes there's certain columns they want to clean up, and they'll come in here and they're kind of surprised they don't have the delete option. Same thing with my wiki. I have a wiki 1 set up that's a Blackboard wiki, and I set it up so it would be graded, so it created this column, so I don't have the option to delete right now. But if I went back to my content area where this is located and delete it there, then I would be able to delete the column as well. You may have been noticing in mine that I have these little exclamation points. These little icons for assignment 1 and wiki 1. This is to let me know that this student has submitted something in both of these areas, and so it is ready to be graded. And while we're here, we might as well notice that if you click the options button in the same cell with that symbol, a little menu appears, and you'll notice 3 options right now: view grade details, exempt grade, and attempt 12, 11 of 18. If you want to view the student's assignment attempt from here, you just come down here, select the attempt, and it's going to take us into the inline grading screen. This is still relatively new to Blackboard. There was a Crocodoc version of this for quite a while. It switched over to Box not too long ago. Blackboard is still working with Box to get a few functions back that we would have had with Crocodoc. But the main thing is you see the preview of the student's file here. We could have a whole session on how to use the tools here to do various things here, but you can use the tools to annotate on the document. Also over here, you've got the area for feedback to learner. And if I wanted to grade this, I've got a couple of different options. I could have actually just graded it or entered a score from the Grade Center itself, or I can enter the score here. So 21 in. If I have feedback, I can type it in here. If I want to add notes, it opens up this area below. They do have a little note here that it's private. Feedback to learner, of course, will be seen by the student. Grading notes are only seen by people with access to the Grade Center. So could be the instructor role, the teaching assistant role, or the grader role would see this. Those are the only 3 roles that have access to the Grade Center. Course Builder has the ability to add content, but they can't see the Grade Center. I could save a draft if I wasn't quite ready to submit this for the student to see. So I've done a few things. I kind of know what the score is. Maybe when I come back later, enter some more feedback, do some annotations. But I could save the draft. Or if I submit it, the student's going to see it right away. So I submit that, and I go back to the full Grade Center. Of course, now I've got a 21 in for that student for assignment 1. Now, we did say we would think about what we would do for configuring grades, because up to now we created a column, we of course entered grades or entered scores for students. And now if you're going to think about configuring it, of course the easiest way to calculate grades would be using the total column. You're just running on total points. But there are a number of instructors who are using weighted. So that's why we went ahead and put the weighted total column in the Grade Center. While we're looking at these 2 columns, you've probably noticed before now that there's a green check mark with the total column. And we find out that's set as the external grade. Now, up until just a few weeks ago, that external grade really didn't mean much within our system. If we could export a grade out of Blackboard, then the only grade that'd be exported pretty much is the external grade. Now, just a few weeks ago, they finally set up the system where grades can be exported from Blackboard into Enroll and Pay. And so this is important now if you want to do that. There was a message sent out a week or two ago about, reporting grades to Enroll and Pay, and there was a note toward the bottom about the ability now to export. So if you're doing total points and that's the grade you want to have exported, you'd leave it on total points as far as the external grade. If you click the little options button in the column heading on weighted total, you will have the option here to make that the external grade. Now, this is more detail than you'll want probably right now, but if you're going to export to Enroll and Pay, you have to have as a letter grade because that's the data that Enroll and Pay needs for student grades. And I think they provided links for the instructions in that email that was sent out from Enroll and Pay. But now, if you are going to weight your grades, let's go to the weighted column, weighted total, and click on the options button. And we'll go to edit column information, which is the same place we went earlier with project 1 column. And this column is a little bit different with some of the areas you can work on. It starts off the same. There's a column name, there's a description, there's a primary and secondary display. It just shows the date that this column was created. But there's a select columns area, and this is where you can start setting up your weighting. I worked with a number of electronic gradebooks in the past where you could set up percentages. To me, Blackboard is still probably the most straightforward. You just have to remember that all the percentages are set in this one column. This is the column that will be calculating your grades. You've got two options. You can pull singular columns over. You can also bring categories in. So let's say, for example, I have my class set up for assignments are going to count for a certain percentage. If I click on assignment and click the little arrow down here toward the bottom on the right, it'll move that assignment over. And that's where you can start seeing where the percentage can be typed in. Let's say I've also got tests, but also I know I want to use blogs and maybe a journal. Those are certain percentages. If you select one of those, then hold the control key down, or I think command key on the Mac, you can select more than one and then click the arrow over here and it'll bring them over. And then you start putting your percentages in. Also, with these categories, you could have Blackboard drop a grade or more than one grade. I've never seen anybody actually use the drop highest grades before. There's probably somebody on campus that does that, but so I could drop my lowest test score. Also, I've never seen anybody use the other option over on the right, use the lowest value or the highest value to calculate. But also, the equally and proportionally could be important. If your tests are all worth the same number of points, then you could just leave it equally. But if one test is 50 points, one test is 30 points, one test is 60 points, you're probably switch it to proportionally so the weighting of even the individual test will be counted in. So the 60-point test is going to count more than the 40-point test. Within the blog, I might see that's worth 20 points. And as I'm entering scores, you may be noticing that it keeps track down here below. So let's say my journal is 20. And so by now I notice I need 30 left for my assignment. It won't switch over to 100% until you click in some other field here, but it will show you what the total weight is. Of course, the best practice would be to have it 100% because nothing else would make a lot of sense, but I've seen people do a few other things. If you don't have it at 100%, it's going to give you a warning. Let me switch this to 25 just so we can see what that is. So if I go ahead and click submit here, it tells me that some of the weights is not 100. Do you want to continue? Well, let's say I'm going to come back to this and work on it later. I could continue. Click OK. It accepts it at 95%. And I want to come back here later and go back to that options button, edit column information, and come back down here and switch it back to, or maybe even add another category. For instance, I don't have a column for my final exam yet, but if the final exam is going to count 20%, I could just bring that column over by itself. So if I bring, maybe my project 1 I'll bring over. And let's say I decide my project 1 actually is worth 5 points, because that'll get me to 100. So you can bring individual columns as well. So if you've got your midterm set up at a certain percentage of the grade and the finals a certain percentage, you can bring over those individual columns. You don't need a category for those since there's only one of them anyway. And now it should let me save that. So now I see it is showing these percentages, and it does display out quite a few decimal places. And at this point in time, I really can't set that to be something else. So not too surprising. Sometimes, though, it's hard to remember where you set those percentages, but it's just a matter of trying to remember that the column is doing everything for you. So you come back to the column, go back to edit column information, and double check your percentages down here. And it is dropping, well, let's see, I thought, yeah, I dropped my lowest test grade, but I don't have any tests in here yet anyway. And so far, it looks like the student's doing pretty well, but everything's coming off the assignment and the project so far. The total points column, if you're running with weighted grades, you probably don't want students to see that because it tends to be confusing for students. So if you come over here, you do have the option of hiding it from students. You can do that, or you could even delete it at this point, because if you're doing weighted grades, there isn't much use for having it there anyway. I'm going to leave it there for a minute, and we'll discuss something else you could do with the total column as well. In the weighted grades, we noticed that it would drop the lowest test score, and pretty much any category you're using, it would drop the lowest score for you. You can actually do it with the total column. If we go to edit column information for the total column, at first it doesn't look like it's possible because right now it's set at all grade columns, but you can have it selected here with selected columns and categories. So at this point, it's not much different than weighted total, except if you did bring the tests over, you can't put a percentage in, but you can still have it drop the lowest. So you could bring all the other columns over except the columns for the tests, and then let the category take care of itself over here and drop the lowest grades. And it could be the lowest 2 grades, and if you really wanted to, you could drop the highest grades too. But most people don't do that. One thing we overlooked, or I overlooked in the last case with weighted column, there's an option right below this called calculate as running total. And the yes and no don't always make that much sense to me in the way that it works in Blackboard. If you read this, which I rarely have, it will tell you if you set it to no, it's going to count a value of 0 for every item that doesn't have a grade yet. Now with total points, that could be beneficial. If you've told the students that out of 750 points, they need, I don't know, 700 points for an A, if you set this to no, if you had a percentage displaying somewhere, it's still going to count everything in for 0 that hasn't been turned in yet. There are few instructors that use it that way. With weighted total, you probably don't want to do this unless you like to scare the students, because it's going to look like they have a really low percentage for quite a while, up until pretty close to the end of the semester. The main thing is with no, it's going to count a 0 automatically for things that aren't turned in. With yes, it's just going to ignore those columns. I could think of reasons in various courses that you may want to set it to no, so students do see what happens because of things that haven't been turned in. And maybe especially near the end of the semester, you'd want to turn that on so they can really tell what's going to happen to what is happening to their grade because things haven't been turned in. I'm going to click that back to yes, leave everything pretty much the same, and click submit, and go back to the full grade center. You'll still notice the total column is hidden from students. If you want to make it available to students again or to show to students again, click back on the button and you'll have the option up here, and it just toggles back and forth. So if I want to show it to students again, click the same area, and I may have to wait for it to refresh, and now students can see that again. Now, there are a couple of things we're going to look at that you don't see from this screen. And to look at anything kind of in the background, we're going to go to the Manage button. And we'll just briefly describe a couple of things on this menu that may look tempting at first. There's an area that says grading periods. If we were teaching at a middle school or high school, and if the first semester was split up into 2 different quarters, then you'd want to have grading periods set up for each of the quarters. Or if it's a year-long class at a middle school or high school and you had to have semesters, you could create the periods for each semester. Well, we don't have any need for that since our courses are created every semester. So grading periods you don't need. Grading schemas can be important if you want Blackboard to set letter grades at a certain place. We'll go there just for a minute here. Under grading schema, there's only one by default in the system. If you click on the options button next to it and go to edit, it'll display the way that Blackboard would assign grades. The left side just shows that if you have a score in a certain range, this is the letter grade that it'll assign to it. So back when we were thinking about these grade columns, we had the option for a secondary display, and one of the options was letter. Well, if you had a secondary display selected for letter, these are letter grades that would be put in for these values. These can all be edited. You can come in here and put any number you want to for these different ranges. On the right side, if you like the ability just to type in an A for a grade instead of putting in the percentage, this just shows you the percentage that's going to be entered by Blackboard in the background if you enter a letter grade. Again, this could be a whole nother webinar on this, but just to notice this is where it's at. And a little bit later, we'll show you a number of places you can go for more information on this. We might mention here that on most screens in Blackboard, up near the top, if you have your question mark enabled over here in the top right, you'll see some text down here. Most of this text tends not to be all that useful, but the more help could be useful because the more help will bring up very specific information for this screen. So here it'll tell you a number of things about this screen. If I went into the schema again, I could click more help and see that as well. I've got a couple of options here to get back to the full grade center. If I click OK down here, which I'd have to scroll down for it, I can do that. Or I could just click full grade center over here if I don't need to scroll down for that. Either way, I'll get to the full grade center again and come back to here. Go back to the Manage button again. I don't know too many people use color codes. Some people like to see certain colors for certain grades. I haven't seen too many people deal with that or worry about that too much. If you are using weighted grades, we mentioned in the weighted total column being able to pull categories over, but we noticed the categories before were just default categories that were from Blackboard activities like assignments or blogs, discussion boards, those types of things. If you come to the categories area, you could create your own categories. For instance, I had project 1 for one of my columns. If I need a category for projects, because maybe all the projects together are worth a certain percentage, I just come up here, click on Create Category, and all I have to do is give it a name. So I'll call it Projects. I don't think I need much of a description for that, but if you want a description, you can enter one, and then you click Submit. And now you'll have it down at the bottom here. Well, actually it's alphabetical, but you will notice that it's the only one that has a checkbox in front of it right now because it's the only one I can eliminate at this point because it's the only one I've created. If you did want to delete that later, you come up here, put the checkbox, put a check in the checkbox and click Delete. But again, if you have a need for other categories than just the default categories, you go to Manage and Categories. The one thing that I find most useful about the Manage button and the Manage menu is column organization. We already noticed as we created columns are always on the far right, and you may want to reorganize your columns. Well, to do that, you need to go to Manage and then Column Organization. And in this case, I don't have that many columns to work with, but you may notice you have a drag and drop symbol out in front. So I can move the project 1 column around. If I had a number of assignments, I may decide I want all the assignments together. So I can just drag and drop to rearrange those if I wanted to. You can use the symbol out front. For screen readers, drag and drop doesn't really work. So we have another button over here on the right, just above the blue bar. And this allows you to select one of the columns. And you can move it using the up and down arrows and then just click apply. So there's two ways to rearrange things. You may have noticed this before in a lot of other areas in Blackboard, because most areas in Blackboard, if you can rearrange, you have the same little button available if you want to do it with just the arrow buttons. Something else from this screen, you'll notice that the categories are displayed for you. We noticed in the full grade center that if you had your cursor in a column, then you would be able to see from the heading bar what the category was, what the points possible. But it's kind of nice to see it all here on the same screen. And I've noticed in the past, if an instructor is having problems with grades being calculated incorrectly, you'll take a glance here and you might notice that most of their assignments were worth 25 points, but maybe by accident they'd entered 250 points or 2.5, something else. It's pretty easy to notice that from this screen because everything's listed together. Some people, it's a little bit concerning to them at first to notice it says not in a grading period. We'd noticed from the manage button earlier, there's a grade periods option. We have no need for a grade period because everything's in the same grading period. Everything's in a semester. So you don't need to worry about that. You can ignore that. There are several other other columns up here above that'll show you that these are shown in all grade center views. Now, there are a number of these that you probably have noticed in the past you don't have much use for, possibly. Lots of instructors don't care too much about the student's Blackboard username. If you put a check in front of the Blackboard username and you come up to the Show Hide button, you could hide the username field or the username column. You may or may not care much about the student ID. I'm going to hide that for right now. Availability doesn't really have much of a use in the way we use the system now, so you might hide that as well. I'm going to go up here and select hide those. I'm going to leave the last access column because the last access gives you an easy way to see the last time the student actually came into your course. It still amazes me how many students will claim to have taken a test like yesterday, and you can come in and look and they haven't been in the course since last Thursday. So it'd be pretty difficult to have taken the test if they never came into your class. So we'll leave that. One thing you do need to make sure you do is click submit. There are a number of times I've come in here and made some changes, felt pretty good about it, and then I clicked on the full grade center. It'll give you a warning about not saving changes, but I'll go ahead and click submit here. It'll take me back to the full grade center. But that can be a pretty handy place to go to look at a number of things. So again, that's manage and column organization. And if I had the ability to move that, I'd probably move it up to the top, but it's kind of in the middle for now. Again, go back to that screen for a second. We see again the point value, see the categories. You can also come back in here, and if you'd already hidden the username field and decided you wanted it back, you need to come to this screen to come find it, change it to where it's showing again, and make sure you submit. I mentioned the last access column a minute ago, and you can see in this case I have a preview account. Of course, I was in there yesterday, so it shows that as last access. Excuse me. Now, there are a few places we can go to get a little bit farther into the weeds here. I don't think we'll go too much farther. I'm going to go back to Manage button just for a minute. Row visibility would give you the ability to hide certain rows for certain students. This might be helpful if you've decided to give a colleague access to your course as a student, but you had some reservations because you didn't want them appearing in the grade center and you thought it might slow you down as you're entering scores if you're entering them manually. So you can come in here and you could hide any of these rows. So again, put a checkbox in front, click the hide rows. It'll show it in gray. It'll show the status is hidden. You want to make sure you click submit before you leave the screen. But if you try to leave some other way, it's still going to warn you that you want to submit that. While we're talking about having colleagues as students, there's a guest role that's available in Blackboard. Some people think it's a good alternative. The guest role doesn't provide access to course materials without the instructor going through and making a lot of changes in the course. So we usually just recommend you use the student role instead. And then we often recommend they come in here and hide the student row. So you don't have to worry about having them in the grade center. I'll go ahead and submit that with student C being hidden. A few other things, you notice that we already mentioned the work offline. There are a few things you might find this useful for. If you go to the download option, the screen shows you a few things. You can go with the full grade center. If you do download the full grade center, you want to be careful where you save it to, because this is, FERPA protected data, so you want to save it to a safe place. You could decide, though, you just want to download one column, or you just want to download user information for some reason. Maybe there's something you want to have kind of for a roster. You can do that here. Remember, too, though, instructors have access to rosters to enroll and pay. You also have access to photo rosters, but you could do something here. If you're going to use Blackboard to upload like test grades, we mentioned earlier using the testing center and then giving you a data file. If you're going to upload, you want to create the column in Blackboard first, download that file, copy and paste the values, and then upload it back into Blackboard. There are ways to do it without creating the column first, but creating the column first makes it much easier to deal with. But so I could say maybe my assignment 1 for some reason is something I'm going to upload from Excel. So I could just download that column right now into an Excel file. And then I could copy and paste from one file to the other. Now there are some challenges in that because you got to make sure you got the students in the correct order. So there, a number of things you may have to deal with before you just copy that data. But this will allow you to do that. Also notice the option you can include comments. Leave everything else pretty much the same. You probably save it to your computer, click submit, and it's going to create an Excel file. One other thing we'll mention here, the next screen gives you the download button. At this point in time, well, even some computers are going to kick up a warning that'll tell you that they're concerned about the file format. I don't know if you can tell it from mine, but Blackboard still downloads Excel as an XLS file format and not XLSX, which is not even the new format. It's been around for quite a while. And some computers may try to warn you about that. This may even do it after I click on that. Hold on for a second. Yeah, the file format extension don't match. Well, it's pretty much because it's XLS, but it's all right. You can still open it up. Which one? Oh. Yeah. And I'm going to go back to full grade. So I click OK over here too, but I'm just going to click on full grades there. Now, offhand, that's most of what I was going to look at this morning. I mean, I kind of did some tips and tricks along the way. I don't know too much of anything else. They keep telling us eventually we can get to where we could pop out the grade center to where it's full screen. You may have learned the hard way that there are ways to get rid of the navigation buttons. For instance, if you move your mouse over here to the left, a little button shows up. Most of the time people do that by accident and they can't find the navigation button, so it's pretty difficult to move around the course. So they'll contact us. Students do this too. They'll contact us and say, there's nothing in the course. We can't find anything. So oftentimes realize apparently they might have clicked this by accident. Well, again, working in the Grade Center might help to do that because it gives a little more screen to work, a little more real estate to work with. But if you come back, you can click on that and it'll come back. So that's one way to give yourself a little more space with the Grade Center. There is this edit rows displayed that allows you to change it. I think it says maximum of 50. Kind of depends on the resolution. You may have your screen more of a vertical format, but so you might want more than just 10 rows displayed. But anyway, you've got that option. A few people use that, but I don't think I've used it very often. So, looking through here, you could reorder any of these columns by clicking on the column heading. Like in Excel, you kind of expect to change the order. So you can sort it here. You could sort by username, all these other things. So no big surprises here. But back to a couple things, just briefly again. You can hide any of these columns in the Grade Center. The easiest way is to click on the column heading with the options button and just use the option to hide it from students. The longer way, if I get back off the options button, go back to edit column information, because down at the bottom, the middle option was, showing this to students. So you could select it here. And again, just remember that the little circle with the little kind of pink bar through it, I guess I tend to think about that being like Saturn on a strange axis or something. But anyway, that would be your clue that this is hidden from students. And there may be all kinds of times you want to hide something from students for a while. Some instructors, like I said, hide the total column because they're not using it. And sometimes they might even hide this for a while. Now, there's a problem with this column. And notice that we don't have the option of hiding that from students. The reason the option isn't out here is because it is that external grade. I'm going to go into edit column information for a second. And coming down to the bottom, I think I can override that from here, which is going to seem kind of strange. But so you can kind of cheat that if you wanted to. And it may seem kind of odd that you would be hiding grading information from students for a while, but if you do weighted grading, you may notice that it tends to be confusing for students for a while until more grades are in the gradebook. So you may decide to hide that. But if I come back here, notice I still don't have the option from this little menu to make it available to students again. So I need to go back to edit column information and just do it the long way. So oddly enough, it is still possible to hide that from students if you wanted to. You just have to go into the actual column information section, or screen rather, sorry. I mentioned earlier that there's always this more help link, at least on most screens. So anywhere in the Grade Center, that's probably going to help you. If later on you're creating a manual column again and you've got some questions about it, click on more help, because more than likely it's going to give you some more details for you. Regarding instructions, hopefully you're aware that we have a website, blackboard.ku.edu, that you can go to for instructions. Over the years, you may have been wondering why we have Blackboard at courseware.ku.edu and then instructions at blackboard.ku.edu, because it seems like it'd be easier to find Blackboard itself at blackboard.ku.edu. It used to be the case where the university didn't use product names in URLs. So back in about 2000 or 2001, they gave Blackboard the URL courseware. If you have a hard time remembering courseware, you can always go to blackboard.ku.edu. And in my case, I have to scroll down. There's a login button down here anyway. So you could just come here if you wanted to. You probably noticed as well, though, any KU web page has a Blackboard link up here at the top, or almost every KU web page. On our instructional area, if you go to instructors, then you have these different areas you can go to. We have a number of things regarding the Grade Center. We don't have a lot of specifics when it gets to weighted columns. We tend to recommend people just contact us. We'd be glad to work on you one-on-one to get that set up to fit your syllabus. And Also, if your students are having issues with Blackboard, feel free to recommend or to suggest that they come to this website as well, because we have quite a few instructions for them as well. So that should be a helpful place for you. If you have a hard time remembering how to contact us, if you can get to this website, you should be able to contact us, because over here on the right side, we have the email address and our phone number as well. And the location. We're in Budig 4, which is in the back side of Budig, pretty much in the basement. We're in with the Center for Online and Distance Learning, CODL. I think that's all I have, and my voice is leaving too for some reason. Must be that time of year, unless I got it from you. Does anyone have any questions that would be useful for everyone else? I mean, if you have any question, feel free to contact me. I'm Brad Rankin at k.edu. You can use itedtech at k.edu, for 2600 on campus for our phone line. We'll be glad to answer any of your questions there as well. Well, in that case, thank you. Hope it was useful for you.